In the year 2017, an innocent man accused of a crime has a choice. Hard time or prime time.
Sensational. Perfect contestant. I want him.
He must pay or play the running man.
On your mark.
I'll be back.
Go!
The highest rated TV show in history.
Guess they want us to stay.
It's a game between life and death.
Give you a lift?
Arnold Schwarzenegger is the running man. He's playing for a prize. The prize is his life.
How about the life?
The running man.
Hi everyone, welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and joining me today I have James. Say hi, James.
Hello.
Today we are going to be analyzing the phenomenon known as reality television and how it relates to reality films. What I mean by reality films is not documentaries or anything like that, but films that deal with where, I guess, reality television came from.
And where does it end?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when you think about it, there are a number of reality-based films in the past. Some of them are sci-fi, some of them are dramatic, and some of them are even like adventure-type films that kind of tippy-toe or basically sometimes dive right into the subject of people being entertained by reality entertainment.
Whether it be like a little bit of violence or
Right.
a little bit of creepiness.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into some of the more popular examples that I can remember, at least from growing up watching films, historically you could say that the idea of reality anything, without getting into creepy, weird, fetishy, subculture stuff, goes back probably to the Roman times in terms of gladiator sports.
You show up, you see mayhem and violence.
Right. It was a mass produced environment. It was staged. It was planned. It went for years and years and decades, probably even more. And it was something that apparently most people accepted as part of their entertainment. It was kind of like an accepted way of keeping people happy. In order to control the masses, you gave them...
It was a diversion. You gave them a way to... This is the weirdness happening in the empire, in the Roman Empire, or in your community.
Forget the hunger. Here's some games for you to enjoy.
And I believe it was a combination of sport and distraction and like, almost like, hey, we're going to throw these suckers in and the tigers are going to eat them.
Right.
Or
Granted,
lions. I'm sorry.
It was to the extent of not just safe entertainment. You're talking about people getting destroyed, killed, maimed, all kinds of weird, barbaric stuff.
And the more barbaric, probably the better. I mean, I wasn't there, obviously, but when I read, it seemed like the more kind of, really bad stuff that they did to people, the crowds were happy.
Now, granted, I'm certain they didn't invent that.
No.
But however, it became part of a civilization's normal
like
behavior.
You said, it became civilization.
Right.
Beforehand, it was just...
It's different if it's some tribe somewhere in an island or something doing something weird.
This took people off the streets and put them in this arena.
Who were allegedly
Coliseum.
civilized people.
Yes. And here, it's okay here, but don't go home and stab, your emperor.
Right. Now, like I said before, this wasn't just entertainment for the sake of entertainment. There was a political... social reason for doing this is to kind of keep people quiet and keep them distracted from the reality of their lives. Like I said before, war, famine, starvation, crime, all that stuff.
So if I may interrupt you, do you feel that the very prevalent rise in reality television in the past, specifically 10 years at least, is a response to war, crime, poverty, recession.
It's hard to say that. And I mean, we'll analyze that question when we get to the end, I think, because that's it all depends on the circumstances. So if we can kind of agree on the fact that that kind of entertainment has existed for a long time, which we know that, it has been fictionalized on films, some of the recreations, if you will, of that sort of thing. There's tons of films having to do with the movie Gladiator, the movie Spartacus, all these movies that deal with that kind of events, the gladiator arenas, the sports, the blood sport, the phrase to, throw the Christians to the lions, that actually used to happen. It was entertainment, and that's how we know it from a historic perspective. However, there are certain more modern films that we grew up with that started to kind of tippy-toe around how would modern man deal with a reintroduction of reality entertainment. And obviously, nobody at this stage, or even in some of the films we were watching, would suggest that we want to go back to an era where we want to see people get completely eviscerated, for entertainment purposes. But
would we?
But in certain genres like science fiction, action, fantasy, they tippy-toe and touch those things. One of the earliest ones that I can think of, and I'm sure there's many more that I'm forgetting because I'm sure during the 70s
but
there's a lot.
At least in things that we can relate
in
to, and
terms of
people our age.
some road markers that you guys can kind of think about, is the movie The Running Man.
Yeah.
We've talked about The Running Man in the past. One of our contributors wrote an article about reality television and his dislike for it, and we referenced The Running Man. The Running Man was from the 80s, based on a Stephen King book, which dealt with an entertainment show. Again, it was political.
It's a bit of a dystopian society,
Yes.
which
It
always
was-
helps that things are a little...
in order to keep people quiet and satisfied.
There's upheaval in politics or something.
Right. Similar to the gladiator matches, they would create these blood sports games where prisoners would run for their lives. And if you win, you get to be released. You get to be freed. And this particular film, I mean, the concept was there.
Did they let them free?
No,
Did
the trick was that nobody would ever win.
Yeah.
But, the hero of the film, Schwarzenegger, defeats the evil game show host who's tied to the politics, who was Richard Dawson, who happened
who was
to be
a very popular game show host.
He was kind of on his way out already, if not already out.
No,
he had a huge reputation.
Yeah, he was kind of like the Family Feud. The Match Game. He was the host of the Family Feud. He appeared on Match Game. He was kind of falling out of popularity
but he was
for a while.
Gigantic in the 70s.
I mean, he's still around today.
Yes. But what's interesting about that film is that the Stephen King story is more about the story. The film is more about a vehicle for Schwarzenegger. This was a time when Schwarzenegger was riding high on,
another
post-Terminator,
an action adventure of a year.
Right, post-Conan, post-Commando. He was riding high and he was making all these films like crazy.
Still hadn't hit Last Action Hero.
But it was interesting that they threw it out there, a society where people were being entertained by, granted, these were not completely innocent victims. In his case, he was. That's why he's the hero of the film.
But that movie's almost 25 years old.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, you can see certain, it's a little bit ridiculous, but there are certain parallels in how ratings, almost anything for the ratings, and politics interfering with television, and on both political parties, at least in this country, how they've found a way, depending on whose their leadership is at the time, finding a way to manipulate events and what we see. And I know that happens in the UK and other countries as well. So it's not unbelievable.
Now, what's interesting about this movie is that, as far as I can remember, the movie came out before the first blips of real reality television hit, at least the United States.
Yeah, I feel at that period of time, the most obvious reality television was something like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, which maybe would follow people, what they do and their nonsense and what they spend it on. Or,
but the real reality television trademark is people arguing in public. Some kind of
a scene.
Right, causing a scene, some kind of dysfunctional behavior to be seen by everybody, maybe even a fight or two, an argument, cops. Cops, in a way, you could kind of say,
actually,
in a way, is a reality show, but it's kind of pseudo-documentary, but it kind of bleeds into how many more of these are we going to see? It's like...
It's almost ridiculous. It's almost sad.
It's like the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket if you watch Cops. But what really, I believe, started the reality trend that we know today is a show from MTV called The Real World, where you do pack 15, 20 cameras around a group of people and follow them around all day long.
We put him in a house and see what happens.
And let him go at it.
This guy's unlikable, and she's easy, and he's a drunk.
Right. Now, that type of beginning, now this was a huge thing for MTV. I don't know how many seasons.
It basically changed MTV.
Oh, yeah. It gave them a huge boost around maybe the early 90s. Because The Running Man was from the 80s. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think it was like 87-ish.
Yeah. As a reaction almost to this new wave of television that at the time people were saying, oh, this is what's going to take over television. This is the next big trend. Hollywood reacted in film mode, obviously, in terms of doing certain films like The Truman Show.
Which was, I think, like early 90s or so.
Yeah, that was a 90s film, and that was probably one of the more popular or at least successful one of the reality films, which was more about a man, Jim Carrey, who is inadvertently, or he doesn't really know that it's happening. He lives in a world that's fake.
Yeah, exactly. His world was created.
Right. Without his consent.
For him to be seen, and we follow his every action.
Now, the film was very, in a way, kind of sci-fi, not as sci-fi as The Running Man, but the whole notion of creating a phony technological world that is really not real, and he is living in a lie basically for the entertainment of everybody else, and kind of how people get really weirdly connected to it. The films also kind of give you this view into how people get emotionally attached to a show, not a drama, but because it's reality, it provides almost like a drug-induced reaction to how involved and how emotionally attached you are to these people, that some of them are even fake. They're not real. And it kind of supposed to kind of put a mirror, I guess, to yourself and say, look at what an idiot you are making of yourself. And in the process, hurting other people. Again, in this particular film, we're dealing with a character who doesn't know what's going on and eventually finds out and decides he wants to go to the real world and leave this phony world behind. Another film I think we touched upon in terms of similar scenario was Ed TV.
Ed TV, a Ron Howard film. It had a lot of popular people, Ellen DeGeneres, who we know, Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson. It was a similar situation. They want to come up with something and follow somebody 24/7 and see how.
But this one is done on purpose. He knows.
They audition him, they interact with him, and they choose him in particular. And then what happens to him? How he finds love, gets depressed, stuff like that. And that's similar to things that we're supposed to believe with Jersey Shore folks or the Kardashians or the Real Housewives. Like, they're so real, it's like.
Another film that I just thought of that in a way touches on that. Not so much the reality, but the desire for reality television and how crazy people act based on the reality they see is a Oliver Stone film called Natural Born Killers.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
In one phase of the film, you could say it's about a murderous couple, but the film is really about how the media perceives and the media manipulates and the media adopts.
They go from really depraved people to darlings.
No, right. They show you how the media at first is looking into and then participating in their crimes because it's generating money and viewers, and people are, again, completely nutty, insane, acting like, if you think about it, back into gladiator days where they care about these people that are immoral and repugnant, but you turn them into such a media icons, media darlings, if you will, that you can't control yourself anymore.
And it's very timely with some of the things we've seen, at least in the past, say 10 years with cable news and things like that, because the characters in there, they were supposed to represent Geraldo types, which some of that may have diminished.
The OJ thing.
I actually, more like OJ.
Because at the end of the film, I remember they do this whole montage of all the crazy reality stuff from the 90s.
And with cable news, it's like, they're each just trying to outdo each other. Who's got the bigger mouth guy, or who's following the murder of the pretty blonde girl every night, and who the killer could be, and how are we going to catch him, and
the police chase of the day. Everybody stops and has to watch. Okay, let's see. Will the guy derail and fall out of the car and run? Yeah. Oh, he's running. Oh, okay, guys, he's running. He's a runner.
But then if something happens, we can't show. We have to have the delay on because we don't want to go show too much.
But we want to show just enough.
Yeah, exactly. If he kills himself, it's okay. But if his dog gets hurt, well, then we've crossed the line.
But yeah, that's those are some of the things that were being addressed by some of these films, and you got to keep in mind as these films are coming out. they're really reflecting what is happening on these reality shows. Now, we can't go too crazy on the reality shows because I couldn't tell you there's so many of them, but there are, I don't know if we can be proud about the fact that I at least watched one.
I agree with you. I don't know if that's something to be proud of.
Is it a guilty pleasure?
We both watched Survivor. And I think, again, Survivor is enough to show the best and worst of what humanity has to offer, because there's so many unlikable people, but every now and then there'll be a nice person. But it seems when there's a nice person, if they do something nice, we mock them. We make fun of him. I can't believe he did that. Colby gave away his chance to win $1 million. This guy he felt bad that he did something disrespectful, so he gave the girl the opportunity to win, blah, blah. And then we just scorn them. Well, but the closest thing to Survivor in the recent movies is the Hunger Games, which is unbelievably popular.
It was funny because, you mentioned the same thing that I was thinking, was that while I'm watching the Hunger Games,
all I could think about was Survivor.
I'm like, oh, wow, look at this. They're forming alliances. They're doing certain things. It's group against group, and sooner or later they're going to turn on each other. And that kept kind of resonating again. You're dealing in a genre, which in this particular case is, I guess you'd call it fantasy sci-fi type of genre.
No, it's possible. I don't know anything about the exact origins of the Hunger Games, what made this woman write that way. She may have been influenced by Survivor. She may have been influenced by The Lottery, a book. She may have been influenced by Gladiator. It's hard to say because I didn't study it, but while you're watching it, there's no denying there are similarities to what we see every week on Survivor.
Yes. In this particular case, like I said, it's easier. I find it easier to analyze these things when they wrap it around a genre. In this particular genre, like I said, it's kind of like a sci-fi fantasy genre. And it's not just the game. Once again, you're dealing with the interaction of the audience. You can't have one without the other. You're also dealing with politics. The politicians are feeding the masses entertainment and
to keep them distracted.
And quiet, and this way everybody functions the way they're supposed to be functioning. This particular version of a reality show, not only are you dealing with people that are interacting in a somewhat fake controlled environment, but the people running the show are purposely interfering with them. So that's an interesting bit. The other interesting bit is that apparently certain audience members who I guess are wealthy are allowed to help some of the contestants, if you will. And once again, the matter in which these contestants come from is, again, kind of like one of these Running Man type of scenarios where it's people that are being brought there against their will. In this particular film, it's a certain age range. They pick one or two from each town district, and they're forced to come and play the games, which is really, fight for your life. In this particular film, even though it's a PG-13 film, I found it very borderline R-rated when it came to the beginning of those games. The preparation for the games, it was pretty standard. Okay, this is pretty simple. I understand what's happening. Once the game started, oh my God, I was like, if they show you one little morsel more, you're in R-rated territory. And to make it even worse, they're all children. So it's like, am I really seeing 24 kids slashing each other to death? And it's like, yeah, but they're not showing it to you.
But like you said, alliances were formed. As I was watching it, I was disappointed because I had no background about the books. And the male lead appears to have formed an alliance against his district mate. Yeah. And it's actually a little disturbing. But then as you see how it's progressing, there are strategies. There's clearly a couple people who are going to just pick off these people. It's just they're using them for now, or the weaker people are using the stronger ones for whatever. And it all balances out, and in the end, it's a somewhat happy ending, I suspect.
Somewhat, yeah. But what's interesting and what kind of brings us almost full circle in this particular conversation is the fact that those rules, those strategies are being used by people in these current shows that we watch. In other words, we watch Survivor. We see people that are distrustful of each other and that have to kind of work together really against their will, but they form these alliances because of their dislike of someone else and not so much because they like each other. It's, it gets a little weird sometimes.
Now, Survivor's gone, I think, about 22 or 23 seasons. It's not that many years, but seasons.
Right, it's 2 seasons a year.
And we've seen a lot now. We've seen it almost every way you could play the game, from a guy who really just outplays everybody else to a guy that is so nasty and unlikable, but winds up becoming more likable because of that. Now, the outcomes are not always the same. There's oftentimes people who are super nice and play under the radar. They'll win. Now, does that happen in real life? Probably sometimes. And do the real nasty skunks win? Yeah, probably a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just weird how by the end of each season, I'm often disappointed with who's won. There's maybe been a handful of people I've been like, yeah, that's the guy I like. He deserves to win.
It depends on how
and
you
then I'm always
approach the
disappointed.
show.
And sometimes it's because the person who won wasn't a bad person. They just didn't, stab enough people, or they didn't do enough. They didn't create enough mayhem. And then we become just like the Romans. We want more. We want more blind sides. We want more.
Well,
more people. Maybe somebody should get hurt. I hope that guy gets hurt or something.
The thing is
somehow.
that when you watch the show, you're being in a way manipulated by editing.
Yeah, that's the only thing, because these aren't reality. They're put on an island. Originally, they're put on an island, a lot like in the Hunger Games. They're put in this forest, but the forest is a digital manipulation. The island is an island only to so much of that you can't get off, but there's camera crews, there's medical crews, there's helicopters, there's boats.
Right.
The food is being rationed or parceled out depending on the particular game or challenge.
But what I'm getting to is that when you watch Survivor, for example, the first thing you have to remember is it's a game. So there are certain rules of the game. You are encouraged to lie, to cheat, to do things. They call it outwit. Outwit means lying, cheating, deceiving people. That's part of the game. And
that always seems to surprise the people at the end when they're questioning them.
You do that. And the fact that you always want to, naturally, I imagine, most people want to cheer for a nice guy, the good guy. There's a good guy, there's a bad guy. And unfortunately, those two things don't jive. You can't always have the nice guy not perform or act in that manner. And when people act in that manner, you get this reaction of, oh, that's awful. You're the bad guy, so you should lose. But sometimes, because it's the rule of the game or the purpose of the game, some of those actions are considered good for the game, which then it's kind of like, wait a minute, now am I being told that that's how life works? And that's when it gets really weird, when the game turns on itself in a way where people do act, like you say, surprised and outraged. And it's like, yes, you are supposed to get upset that somebody screwed you over, but that's how this game is played. So are you not allowed to feel that way? No, but you should, but you shouldn't. It's weird. You just don't know which way to turn. And because these people, in a way, are being slowly starved a little bit, not as much as they did originally.
It used to be a little bit tougher, but I think they started to realize people were suffering.
They used to go a little nuts, when you watch them react and having breakdowns and injuries and stuff like that. But it's still a good game. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I watch every season. I want to identify the good guy. I want to identify the bad guy, and I want to get rid of the bad guy. But a lot of times, it's all editing. It's like, I know that there's rumors that a lot of things are staged, and I hope it's not true, but I do know for a fact because I know about it.
We know how television works. There's a lot of standing around.
The way they edit things and show you things is specifically made to make you go in one direction and go the other direction.
And that's big money that they're dealing with. A CBS network show that's been around for quite a while. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised if it becomes a fact that, a lot of this was staged. And, Well,
the problem is that when naturally drama doesn't evolve on its own, they have to nudge it. They have to give you a tease for next week of who will betray Joe Blow. And it's like, and then you watch next week, nobody betrayed Joe Blow.
Yeah, it's just the way they edit it.
It's like, okay, never mind. But, this is one of these shows that I like to defend the fact that I watch it, but in a way, it's kind of like, why am I watching this? But it's like, but it's good, but it's not.
Yeah, I guess
helpful.
I guess by drawing the line at Survivor, I feel better about myself.
There are much worse.
There are worse.
I don't know if it helps our case.
There may or may not be better ones. I'm not sure.
Extreme into,
like I said, the Jersey Shore. Is that reality or is that just sad? I mean, I think in a way that's changed how people act. That's become okay now to act all crazy.
Are we dealing in, is it bum fights? Are we dealing in that? Like, here's $20. I want you and your drunk friend over there to beat the crap out of each other.
Today, you would find that on YouTube, and that's considered distasteful. They might even be a crime.
But how far are we from that?
Yeah, exactly. But how far until, we paid the bums. We cleaned them up afterwards, and we gave them
there's always
some
been
money.
more extreme entertainment in terms of, like, I used to hear a lot about Japanese game shows that do really outrageously disgusting, painful things even, and it's like, yeah, well, that is disgusting and painful, but how far are we from there?
Well, a lot of that
Survivor,
kind of things
look
on
at
Survivor. Eating
Eat
bugs,
this bowl of grubs.
eating rats, eating
Fear Factor.
It's not that far. Oh, there was one recent Fear Factor. I think they had to cancel that involved
bodily fluids.
Yes, all right. That's a nice way to put it. So I'm kind of glad I don't get involved in that. But I mean, if Survivor did it, I guess it'd be,
I'd like to think.
Hey, Carlos, guess what they did? Did you see it?
I'd like to think that Survivor is
a little more highbrow.
Right. It's the highbrow of this genre, which it's a double-edged sword.
For now, until ratings start dropping, and then they have to come up with a better plan. The one place I'd like to see it go, I'm sure a lot of people are starting to feel that way. There was a really good Doctor Who episode from the 80s that probably nobody remembers and only a handful of people had ever seen. And it was called Vengeance on Varos. And what happened is people would be watching life and politics as if it were a reality show. And if they were unhappy with the outcome, they would vote against the politician instantly, and pain would be inflicted upon the politician at that moment. So imagine your president proposes a new budget and people are unhappy. A certain lobbying group is unhappy and the votes get cast. I don't think people...
Sounds almost like instead of electing a president, somebody gets chosen. Like, no, I don't want to be president. You're the president. No, I don't want to be
You're the new sheriff. I don't know what happened to the old sheriff. He's over there in the cemetery. Yeah, I don't think that we're going that far yet.
And I'll tell you what's also very conflicting, and is the fact that, and as I tried to indicate that before, on a show like Survivor, one of the greatest, and I like to call them characters, even though they're not characters, but contestants or whatever, you have somebody like the Russell character, which was completely repugnant in terms of how much he cheated and schemed, but he was perfect.
On that show, he was wonderful. If he was in your office, if he was in your neighborhood, you would want to just find a way to throw a bag over him and throw him in a well. But on that show...
But I think he was, as far as I'm concerned, the most conflicted individual for me to root for, because, like you said, he was great at the game, but he was morally unacceptable.
But assuming almost anything goes in that world that they've prepared for that particular season, you want a guy like that to shake things up, for better, for worse.
But now you're talking from the ratings and the corporate point of view. But think about it. Are you willing to accept that on everyday life? In other words...
No, that's what I'm saying. We as fans are willing to accept that for
Russell, entertainment
purposes. The world, according to Russell in that season, whatever he can get away with, whatever mischief he can come up with, as many idols as he can find, great. Sadly, the people he was competing with forgot it was a game and took everything he did very personal, as if it was a crime against them, instead of a way to outwit and outplay. And I feel at least once or twice he was cheated out of a win because of animus against the way he behaved, rather than fair assessment of his play.
The problem is, can you separate yourself from the game? Can you turn off mentally and say, okay, you go to work, you associate with people, do you go into Russell mode sometimes? Do you accept that from your politicians, from your bosses?
No,
you know what I mean?
But you fantasize that you could be Russell sometimes in your office space. Or
I hate to break it to you, but I have a feeling there's more Russells than non-Russells out there. And we secretly admire that and encourage that secretly, like wink, wink, type of deal. But again, it's really fascinating that even in the movies we're watching, it's reflecting itself back to us, and it's nothing new. It's been done a million times, even before film and before roads. And we continue to get those messages back in different types of genres. So we will continue to watch Survivor. We will continue to every now and then engage in these films. There's more Hunger Games coming, so we're going to watch them. And hopefully we'll see which way this whole thing goes. The trend, the reality trend, just like everything else, is going to end at some point. And I don't know what's next. I haven't heard anything about anybody predicting the next trend of television genre. Reality is eating things alive.
At this point, it's cheap and easy to get people who want attention and are willing to subject themselves to either embarrassment or pain for the opportunity for a few extra bucks. Hey, the Kardashians just allegedly signed a $40 million contract to do what they do, which I couldn't really tell you what that is.
Yeah, what do they do? I don't know. The same thing Paris Hilton does. I'm still trying to figure that out.
I don't know.
If you would have told me 20, 30 years ago, 25 years ago that reality would rule and game shows would be on prime time, I would say, what?
If you had told me your daughter has to do an embarrassing sex tape, but a few years later she'll have $40 million and be a household name.
But your daughter has to be the daughter of a millionaire to begin with.
Well, there you go.
I don't think any old person out of the street can get that deal.
I think you got me there.
That's the trick. Anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on today's discussion of how reality television and films and reality in general all kind of mesh together in some disgusting way. Join us here next time when we continue to talk about one of these bizarre subjects, and we will see you here soon on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye. Stop.